Hey, Calvary Crossway. You're up.
Deer in the headlights.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're kind of going to start off just right away getting at what we want to talk about tonight. Yesterday in church, we looked at God's view of marriage, and we looked at the fact that it takes work to develop a godly marriage and a marriage that gives God honor and glory. And that a lot of that work is when you're dealing with interpersonal conflicts in the home and in marriage. And so, yesterday, as we kind of went through, we looked at one of the points of having a healthy marriage is to make sure that you're communicating well. And part of that is dealing with conflict. And so, tonight and tomorrow night, we're going to deal with
Have some
conflict.
conflict.
We're not going to have conflict, we're going to deal with conflict.
There was some conflict
So one of the best
in our
things
house
about
today.
conflict is to try and avoid it in a biblical manner. But the reality is, even when you can't avoid a conflict, so there's no way around it, it comes to a head. Every single conflict gives you an opportunity to glorify God. I think that's something that's really important that we have to understand about conflict is we always look at it as something really bad. Priscilla, is conflict bad?
Yes. I'm very much the Enneagram 9 where conflict is like the worst thing ever.
Yeah, Priscilla is the kind of person who will avoid conflict at any
I
cost.
might chop off my own arm if it meant people would get along.
Yeah, this is definitely true.
Ugh.
And I think that, especially when you have a tendency to think that way, it's really important for you to recognize that there's an opportunity. In every conflict that we have, there's an opportunity for us to be able to grow and for us to glorify God. Another opportunity that's given to us in conflict is to get the log out of your own eye.
You had them written down. I couldn't remember what they were, and then I realized they were on the paper. I was like, I have nothing to say because I can't remember. Get the log out of your own eye.
Yeah,
In other words, deal with your own problem first.
yeah.
That's the first foremost thing to do is recognize your fault and deal with that.
And if you remember, that comes from Matthew chapter 7, verse 3, where
Five.
verse 3,
Oh.
um, so it comes from that area in which Jesus is telling people, judge not that you be not judged, for with every judgment you produce, you will be judged. With the measure you use, you will be measured. In other words, if you're telling someone, hey, you've got to do things this way, then you're going to be held to that same standard. And then he says, why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? The reality is, a lot of times in conflict, a lot of that can be avoided when you recognize, man, I am the one who made the mistake today. And that's where we're going to spend the most of our time today is what does it look like when you recognize I've sinned, I've done something
Mm-hmm.
wrong, and to confess that sin to a person and get it right. So the next opportunity that's given is to gently restore. And that's what we're going to talk about tomorrow night. What does it look like to restore? And we're going to teach you a principle called the pause principle. And that will help you know, how do I go to a brother who may have offended me or may have hurt me and restore him and restore our relationship. And then we'll also look at what it looks like when you're being restored. So when someone comes to you and they say, I've done something wrong, what does it look like to build that relationship back? And so we're going to look at that tomorrow. Tonight, we're going to look at what does it look like to get the log out of your own eye.
And so we're going to talk about the 7 A's, and we'll tell you all 8 of them.
Yes, this is exactly true. I have added one, and I wasn't original to me in adding one, but I'm going to add one because I feel like it's really important.
So we'll tell you all 8.
Yeah, and these are when you recognize I've done wrong. It takes a humble attitude to do that, which is very important for you to recognize before you go to someone, before you go after them, to stop and say, okay, what did I do? What have I done to
Mm.
contribute to this? Where's the log in my eye? And the Bible tells us in Proverbs chapter 28, verse 13, whoever conceals his transgression will not prosper, but he who confesses and forsakes them will obtain mercy.
So the first A that we talk about is to address everyone involved or all who are affected by the problem.
Yeah, and our tendency is when we've done something wrong, maybe to just not look at it. If you're like Priscilla, just to say, well, I'll just ignore that. This is not We may have to practice this afterwards now, but you did say that you want to avoid conflict.
Avoid conflict. I thought you meant like I don't deal with this well
Yeah.
and I don't address everyone.
No.
As
Uh,
if
but to just hide it and to say, to not look at it. Another way is more kind of my way is if I'm really loud about the problems that you have, then you'll never see mine. And the reality is God calls us to come before people and to humble ourselves and address everyone who's involved. And so as you're beginning to look at what you've done, begin to look at, okay, who did this impact and who do I need to apologize for? So an example of that would be, men, you get angry at your wife, and so you yell at her because she messed up or broke something or forgot to change the oil and the car is dead or something like that. And so you yell at her, but you haven't done that. And all of the kids see you yell at her. So addressing everyone involved is not just saying, honey, I'm sorry, I did wrong, and we'll look at how to do that in more detail, but also going to the children and doing that as well.
another one is to avoid if, but, or maybe, or basically that idea of making excuses. I learned this one probably the clearest. We had just a lovely older gentleman in our church that helped us with our sound system, and I was supposed to meet him at the church to do something, and I totally forgot. So like 20 minutes after I was supposed to be there, he called me, and I just remember like it had been it had been a crazy day, but I just got to the church and I just apologized. And I was like, that was wrong of me to not keep our meeting like I had said. And he was so gracious and so kind, but it also just really, God used that to just cement in my heart. Like when we're wrong, just own it.
Yeah.
Just own it. There's no need to make excuses.
So I think one of the most common ways that we say if, but, and maybe is, we'll say something like, I'm really sorry that I got angry and threw that across the room, but you said this. And so what you're really doing is nullifying everything that
Mm-hmm.
you've just said. I did this, but by the way, I wouldn't have done it if you had whatever.
I'm sorry that you offended me and I.
Yes. And we get pretty creative in being able to do that. So address everyone involved, avoid if, but, and maybe.
And then admit specifically what happened. So, kids do this all the time. They get in a fight or something, and you're like, go tell so and so you're sorry. And they go, I'm sorry. And there's just no like specific acknowledgement of what happened. So maybe for a 2-year-old, that's okay. But as we're older, we need to be specific about what we
Mhm.
know we did wrong.
Yeah, and sometimes we come and tell people what someone else did wrong so that we can kind of pad what we did. But we need to admit specifically what we've done. And what that means too is admitting our heart attitude as well as our actions. So if you get angry and you throw something across the room, you don't just say, I'm sorry I threw something, but you're also saying, I'm sorry I got angry and I threw that. So it's the heart as well as the actions.
Another one is to acknowledge the hurt or to express godly sorrow.
Yeah, and I think this is really important for us to recognize that we need to acknowledge that when we do these things, it hurts someone. And to acknowledge specifically, so put yourself in their shoes. If someone treated you the way that you just treated that person, think about how you would feel and what would go on. And sometimes you need to ask the person, I know I hurt you, but I'm not sure the depth of how much I hurt you. Can you help me to understand so that I can deal with
Mm-hmm.
that? And by the way, what they say next is probably going to be difficult for you to hear, but it's really important for you to recognize that your actions hurt someone's heart because we love people more than we love saving
Mm-hmm.
our face on that.
Another one is to accept the consequences of your actions or to make a restitution. This is something that's really hard to teach, especially kiddos. Like, I didn't
Mhm.
mean to break the toy. Well, I understand you didn't mean to, but we still have to fix it.
Yeah, I think especially in our entitled society where things come pretty easily, we tend to break things and realize, okay, it's just, it'll be here tomorrow because I order it on Amazon, and our kids see that. And so it's important for us to help our children recognize that when they break something or when they do something that they need to fix it. But also in this, it's accepting the consequences is sometimes realizing that you've hurt the relationship and it's going to take time to rebuild that relational equity. And you can't just say, hey, I said I'm sorry. Now, why are you still struggling with this? Or why are you still hurt? Because the wounds that we cause when we hurt someone last longer than just, okay, I said I'm sorry. They don't just go away, those feelings that happen. And we'll talk about a little of that on our last one. We talk about how to give forgiveness, but at the same time, recognize it's probably going to be difficult for someone. And so accept those consequences as well.
And alter your behavior. So actually change. There's probably nothing that proves that you really weren't sorry more than going right back and doing the same thing over and over again. So if we're truly repentant, if we're truly sorry, then we need to have new actions and new heart attitudes that flow out of that.
Yeah, and two, recognize that some of the attitudes and actions that you've been doing have been built into your life over lifelong habits, and you may need to get help to be able to really see change and to be able to see deeply into what you need. So alter your behavior. And then the last one, and this is the last for a reason, is to ask for forgiveness.
The second to last.
Well, the last one's just really addition to this one.
So the last one ish is to ask for forgiveness.
Yeah. So for us to ask for someone to forgive us, and this is last because we have to do all of these other pieces before. You know, if you've had a horrible confession up to this point and you don't ever say I'm sorry, you just say I know you're hurt. Forgive me, please. None of the other pieces happened, and that's why this is last. And it is important for us to recognize we've done wrong and to ask for forgiveness. And the last one that is an addition is to allow time. Recognize that you've already been through this process. You've had the ability to think through who all was involved, what were all of the components. You've thought through your heart and your action in it. And this is the first time many times they've heard of it. And so give them time. And don't allow, if it does take them time, don't allow that to build up and make you angry and bitter in that.
Yeah, and the reality is a lot of times when things are hurtful, like I know for me, it takes me a really long time to just process even through hurtful, hard things. And so to really, truly understand all that happened might take that person a little bit of time, or it might even be something so big that there needs to be help involved to get to that point.
And so if you're in a relational place in which, you know, you're struggling or caught up in one of these places, that's a great time for you to ask for help. That's why God has placed us inside of the church. You know, I made a mistake recently with one of our neighbors in which I should have done all of these processes, and I was really busy, and I just thought to myself, I'll ignore it. I'm not going to go, and I'm not going to be able to deal with these pieces. You know what? It cost me a lot of relational equity in that relationship, and I think it's really important for us to, when we recognize we've done wrong, immediately start to take action towards resolving that issue and being able to see the Lord do this work of restoring, and recognize that it's going to be God that restores. As we go through all of this, God is going to be glorified as you recognize the heart attitudes that were behind your sin and confess it, but also recognize that God is going to be glorified in the relationship that is built out of this. So tomorrow night, we're going to look at the pause principle. So when someone has offended you, how do you go to them and kind of talk through them and make sure that you're aiming for restoration and not annihilation in them? And so we'll look at that tomorrow night, and we look forward to seeing you then.
And it's also Josh's birthday tomorrow.
Tomorrow is my birthday. I am turning.
He's old.
Yeah, I am turning
So old.
38 years old tomorrow. But I've decided that since 2020 so far has been kind of a bummer year, I'm just going to skip this birthday and not turn 38. So in 2021, that's when I'm going to celebrate my 38th birthday.
Nice plan. We shall see if it works.
Yeah, I think I can avoid another trip around the sun that way. All right, church. We love you guys, and we'll be praying for you as you begin to put these things into practice. I'm going to go ahead and put all the stuff that we taught through today in the comments, because if you can remember those 7+1 A's, you're better than we are on it, and I want you to be able to have these as resources.
Apparently, I did have them memorized at one point, I was told.
Yeah,
I
had to learn these for a class once, and Priscilla was teaching me them in the class, and I couldn't remember one of them, but she could. And so, yeah, that's just a
But then
bummer.
today I didn't
She
remember.
wasn't even taking the class. So, all right, Calvary Crossway, we love you guys, and we will see you tomorrow night. Musgraves.
Out.